Hello and welcome to Events Dear Boy, the podcast for anyone involved in business events. If you're a conference producer, corporate event organizer, or events agency, then we're here for you. We want to share the highs and the lows, the best practices, as well as the horror stories. You can expect ideas and inspiration, and maybe some laughs too.
And if you're a speaker at these events, then we're here for you too. We're going to talk about how you do it, what makes speakers nervous, and how it feels when it all goes brilliantly or terribly.
My name is Catherine McNamara, and I'm the marketing lead at the talent agency Pomona Partners, and someone who has organised many business events in my working life. Alongside me is Pomona Partners founder and veteran of 1,000 speaking gigs, Tom Cheesewright.
Each episode, we're going to be joined by a guest from the business event space, either an event organizer or a speaker. We'll ask them to share their experiences, both good and bad, and their tips for other people in their positions. We're now in season 2, so there's plenty of episodes featuring incredible guests for you to go back and listen to or watch if you want to see our pretty faces, if you haven't seen them already. Plus, there's also a little wrap-up where Catherine and I talk about all the things we learned in season 1 and throw in a few bloopers.
And I'm delighted that this week we're joined by Martin Bryant. Martin, welcome to the podcast.
It's a pleasure to be here. Hello.
Excellent. Right. So we're going to dive straight in. Talk to us about your area of expertise.
Sure. So technology is my thing. I have been a technology journalist for 15 years. I got into it really through blogging, through this kind of love of the new. So I remember writing just as a hobby, really, for years about why I'd never buy an iPod. I bought an iPod the following year, things like that. But then because they just seemed really expensive and pointless when they were cheaper MP3 players. But I changed my mind, and then moved into professional tech journalism a few years later. I thought I could do that. I saw the pro tech blogs that were emerging. I thought I could do that. Applied for a job and got one, and worked my way up to editor-in-chief at a site called The Next Web, and traveled around the world, meeting tech startups and big tech companies and CEOs and all that kind of thing, and really kind of exploring the tech world in lots of different ways. And I've kept at it ever since. I now run a newsletter called PreSeed Now, which focuses on the really early stage companies that most people don't write about, and all the really interesting things they're doing that are really cutting edge before anyone else writes about them.
An excellent newsletter, I have to say. I've literally just read the most recent installment just before we came on to record. It's a hugely valuable resource for me, and it's one that I recommend frequently. So if you're not a subscriber already, do go and subscribe. Question though, how did you go from being a journalist to being a speaker? Because it's quite some time now since I think I first saw you speaking and actually hosting panels and things like that.
I've always loved being on stage, and I think that's the first part. Just wanting to do it is an important thing, of being comfortable doing it. So I've been on stage since I was Joseph in the Nativity when I was 4 years old or 5 years old. But
and you make music as well.
Yeah. So I used to play music live, and there's nothing like just getting up there and doing it to remove any sense of kind of nerves around doing it, and just wanting to do it more. So in terms of conferences and chairing panels and hosting events and things, it really started when I started at The Next Web, and the founders at the time, I was at that point just a contributor, just contributing a couple of posts a day usually, and the founders would occasionally get asked to go and host events or do like a fireside chat where they'd interview a tech founder or something, but they couldn't always do it, and so they'd say, does anyone want to do it? And I'd say yes. So my first one of those was in Kyiv in Ukraine in 2010, interviewing the first tech startup in Ukraine to raise money from Silicon Valley, I think, and a company called Viewdle. I was interviewing the founder of that, and loved it so much. I said yes to every opportunity after that, and got asked to do many more.
So what kind of events do you find yourself booked for the most? Does it fall into, obviously there's the technology bias, but talk to us a little bit about the events and the kind of people that you're kind of talking to.
Yeah, so it's a mixture. So sometimes it is tech industry, so maybe hosting an event for a tech industry audience, or chairing a panel for a tech industry audience. But also I'm booked for people who aren't necessarily involved in tech, but want to know about the latest emerging technologies. So giving a briefing to, let's say, the board of a charity, maybe, about how they could use new technologies like AI. That's a big one everyone's asking about at the moment. But a few years ago, people wanted to know about blockchain. Everyone wanted to know about blockchain. Or it could be just practical things like what's the best email app to use, or workplace collaboration tools, things that are a bit less maybe cutting edge and exciting, but people want to know what the best out there are for keeping them productive. And so I do a lot of that as well.
That's what I find myself often pitching you for when we're talking to organizers about events. Someone who can come in and say, I actually go and speak to the new startups. I can see what's coming. I know where the money's going. This is kind of what's next. And people are really excited by that. I think people really like someone who's got that done that pre-investigation, if you like, into what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, and it's not just about, wow, look at this amazing, exciting thing. Isn't it amazing? And that's part of it, I think, because it's got to be interesting, hasn't it? But beyond that, it's kind of, this is interesting, but here are the reasons why it might not be as big a success as all the people who hype it up are saying, or here are the things you might have to consider if you want to use this in your business. It's giving that balanced view, really, about where the technology is going.
Brilliant.
And what is it that you love the most about speaking, Martin?
Apart from that lifelong love of being on stage.
Honestly, yeah. I mean, that is part of it, but I think I think a lot of it is just being able to give value to people. I talk to people who I gave a talk to like months ago or years ago, and they'll say like, oh, thanks for that talk. It was really, really useful. It really inspired us. And when I hear that, it's the same with when I write articles as well. If somebody says, I found that really useful, or, PreSeed Now is a really useful read, and it's one of the few newsletters I open every time I open my inbox, that just makes it all feel worthwhile to me. It's providing value, and a lot of that comes from, I think, being focused on the audience. And you've got to really, like anything really, in any kind of project you're doing, it's about having that focus on what is the outcome I want to deliver for this audience, and being laser focused on that, and then building all the kind of engaging chat and banter and the exact content around that to make sure you achieve that goal for the audience, which it sounds obvious, but isn't always the way it goes for some people.
It's a really interesting parallel, actually, and you'll pick up on this as well, Catherine, as a former journalist, but that is one of the real parallels between a good journalist and a good speaker, isn't it? It's that understanding who you're writing for or you're speaking to, and actually shaping the content to you've got to understand what their existing knowledge base and prejudices are. You've got to understand what language they speak, and actually key into all of those things in order to put the right content together for that audience.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about preparation a lot of the time. It's about adjusting content for the audience. You might have a set talk you give, but you probably want to change it quite a bit for each audience, because in the end you want them to say, this speaker has thought of me for this, rather than just they've just come to give a generic talk and they've actually thought about what we in this room want from this. So yeah, there's a lot of that. And when I was an editor, I was editor-in-chief of The Next Web, I used to drill into the team, always think of your audience. Like for Americans, we had Americans on the team, and they'd sometimes write in dollars, or write the name of a state without pointing out that it was America, or not even
dollars
think about Well, like, they'd think America first, because not in a dodgy way, but like they'd think like they'd only think about America, like, so it's because America's such a huge country and a huge market. Most of the American press, business press, tech press, if you read American news sites, will write from an American perspective, which makes sense. But because we had an international audience, a big audience in Europe, in India, it was actually doing a disservice to say Mark Zuckerberg announced that this morning, for example. Well, what morning? Whose morning? And I best thing I got from that was somebody I worked with ended up being an editor at actually a bigger news site, and she was working with a team there, and she would drill into them. She learned from me, always think of your audience around the world and be considerate to the rest of your audience. And so audience-centric all the way.
Brilliant. And obviously there's what you love about speaking and kind of putting yourself out there. Conversely, have you got any experience of when it's not been so great? Any experiences that have been the bottom end of the spectrum that you can share with us?
Oh, yes. So the one time I had a panel that went really badly was I was at a trade show, and I'd been asked to just chair a panel at a trade show, and it was about a really technical topic. It's the kind of thing I wouldn't normally say yes to, but because of the way we were like a partner with the company I was working with was a partner with this event, and so I was kind of in a position where I had to say yes to doing this thing. And so I went along, and the preparation had involved basically asking a bunch of people who were vaguely interested in this topic to come on stage and talk about it at this trade show. So there were lots of things. It wasn't like a conference where everyone was sitting down watching this thing. There were lots of things going on, but you could sit down and watch a talk if you wanted to. And so there were some people who'd sat down, and I said, okay, welcome. The first problem was that of the 5 people who were supposed to be there, only 2 had turned up, and one of those was a replacement for somebody else who had turned up at the last minute. And neither of them wanted to talk. So I could not exactly fill for, I think they'd booked in half an hour for this panel, and getting anything out of these 2 people was so difficult. And I soldiered on for a few minutes. I tried to get the audience to ask questions. The audience weren't the chatty audience type. Sometimes you get audiences that are really engaged and want to ask questions. This audience were just kind of like not interested. I pride myself on running a panel up or any kind of talk or session up until the moment where it's supposed to finish. You finish then, you don't finish massively early, you don't finish late at all, you finish on the button. I did a broadcasting degree, so I learned a lot about television production and how you have to hit those timing points. This was the one time where I had nothing to go on, and I just had to take the executive decision on stage at that moment to end it after 5 minutes, because literally there was nothing else to do. And I learned a lot about what to say yes and no to in that situation, but I also learned a lot about event preparation and making sure that the speakers are well primed for it. That was another thing. Generally speaking, if you do a panel, you will plan with the speakers in advance. You'll learn about them. You'll have lots you can draw on, research to talk to them about it. But when most of them don't turn up, and it's been arranged as a kind of last minute thing, and one person's a replacement anyway, it kind of throws the whole thing off. So yes.
I can't let you finish your answer there. I need to know how you diplomatically, 5 minutes in, had to end it on stage. Just give me a flavour.
Oh, it was literally I can't remember. This was so long ago. It was well, I don't think we can carry on with this, unfortunately. So it was something as simple as that. And given the environment, it was a trade show. It wasn't one of those kind of conferences where everyone's watching you and it's silence, and you've got a moderator. You've got like an MC who's who's gone for a coffee break because they know they've got half an hour or anything like that. It was literally, it was ending, and then there was nothing happening there. So I could end it without any kind of problem. So in that, I was lucky in that respect. And I think because it was that kind of format, the people organizing it and booking the speakers probably hadn't considered that much. They just had some content to fill. So it wasn't too much of a problem to do that. So I was fortunate in that regard. But generally speaking, yes, panels require a lot more preparation than that, and a lot more familiarization with the panelists and pre-planning all the content. Yeah.
It's the stuff of nightmares, but you've kind of tripped into the next question there, Martin, which is around, the tips that you give to speakers, notwithstanding wanting to be there is kind of, the big one.
Yeah.
But what would you say to those in terms of tips for other speakers?
Yeah, so obviously, let's say you're giving a talk. Obviously, you might have some slides. Obviously, you'll have planned out what you're going to say. Obviously, all of that's all obvious. But I think it's important not to plan word for word exactly what you'll say unless you've been asked to do that. I'm not the kind of speaker who will have a word for word script that I will learn and I will say off the top of my head. I will have bullet points and I will draw on those bullet points. I will rehearse. I'll in the days beforehand, I will rehearse those bullet points and I will rehearse the whole talk several times all the way through to make sure I'm comfortable doing it. But I know I won't have a specific word for word script that I will go for. And that makes it more dynamic on the day. It means you can kind of go off on tangents that might be useful. Something in the news has happened that is relevant and you can quickly draw on that. So doing all of that. And the other thing I think is really important that I really get a lot of benefit from is spending 5 minutes or 10 minutes even before you go on stage, before you're talking to your audience, of just spending time on your own somewhere, getting in the zone, getting in that on-stage mindset. And for me, it's what are the first 3 things I'm going to say on stage when I get up there, and going through them in my head, making sure it's something that's engaging, tailored to the audience, original, useful, and kind of puts a bit of me across as well, so can get people used to who I am as a personality, as a speaker, and just getting that done, not thinking about days in advance, but in the moment. You're just about to go on stage. You just have 5 minutes. You walk off. You're mouthing words silently to yourself, looking a bit strange to anyone else, but you're just getting in that frame of mind, and then you can get up there and get straight into it.
Yeah. I'm still slightly stuck on your story of people not turning up for the panel. It's just such a horrifying experience. It's reminded me of, thankfully I wasn't doing a panel. I was just doing a speaking gig as part of an event. Let's call them a very large American tech company. And this is about 10 years ago now. And the first speaker, who was meant to be a very big name, was replaced by their deputy, who was not a big name at all, a politician. 2 other speakers got stuck. For some reason, they'd both been in the Isle of Man. Or no, not the Isle of Man. Somewhere maybe the Channel Islands, and they couldn't, and they were flying in together, and there was fog and their flight couldn't take off. And the MD of this very large technology company was doing the full, just exploding alpha type, CEO human, like just very, very, very angry at everyone and everything around him. Was not coping well with this situation whatsoever. But I understand his stress, because it's a horrible situation when you've got all this content prepared and people just don't turn up.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Likewise, Martin, what should event organisers do to get the best out of their speakers? What are the tips there? Again, what wisdom can you share with us?
How do they get the best out of you?
How do they get the best out of me? Right. So what they really need to do, and it's pretty simple from my perspective. It's preparation. It's timings. It's things like you have exactly this amount of time. It's making sure that everything is it's just straightforward, really. Unknowns are the problem for me. It's where people haven't really thought about how long do we want them to speak, what do we want them to do when they've finished, and I'll always ask those questions. Do you want me to walk off that way? Do you want me to walk off that way? Does it matter where I sit? exactly how long have I got? Are you going to give me a signal when I'm finished, or do I need to watch the time myself? All those kind of things are really basic things, but it really helps if they've been thought about in advance, because it just makes everything so much more straightforward. Those kind of on-stage timing, planning, logistics, all of that, just having thought about all those really basic things just makes everything run so much more smoothly on the day.
Absolutely.
Excellent. And you know what? I think that's a really great place to wrap it up, Martin. So thank you so much for coming on. And thank you for listening and watching. And we hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please leave a review, like and subscribe. Most importantly, share the podcast with your colleagues and peers, whether they work in events or whether they're fellow speakers or whether they've just got an interest in it. And thank you so much. We'll be back with another episode very soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.